Hello, I'm Irina and welcome to my channel. This is my first video ever in here. I was having a bit of trouble understanding what I wanted to do and what path I wanted to follow with this YouTube channel. I think I'm still trying to figure it out, but I also realized when it comes to being passionate about certain stuff, there's just no right time to start. Today, I want to talk to you about some of my favorite reads of 2026 so far, starting with Bread of Angels by Patti Smith. Patti Smith, man. She's one of my favorite authors, poets, artists. She's one of my biggest inspirations like in life. It's because of her I went back to writing. You probably find me a lot of time sitting at a cafe, observing, writing my thoughts down. Sometimes just reading, sometimes just doing nothing. But it's it has a lot to do with Patti Smith. But Bread of Angels, I think it's safe to say it became my favorite memoir of hers. I've read all of the others, and if I'm to advise you to read Patty for the first time, this won't probably be my first choice because I think it makes sense for you to read this one after. So maybe you can start with Just Kids, her most famous memoir, and it's just as great. It's like going on an adventure. And honestly, I feel like every book of hers feel like going on a little trip without ever leaving place. Bread of Angels felt incredibly intimate in comparison to other memoirs. They're all intimate, but this one, because it explores family dynamics, her childhood, in a way she hadn't written about before, that's why I think it makes more sense for you to read this one after the others. Because while reading it, I thought about so many aspects of her and of her life that, oh, that makes sense now because of her upbringing and all. It's a joy to read Patty. Many people have great gifts, and I think Patty's biggest and greatest gift is definitely writing. Like the way she puts whatever is going on in her head on paper, the way she does so openly, like full of love, it's incredible. I love Patti Smith. The second book, maybe even if you haven't read this book, you probably like me have seen it on Book Talk, on Bookstagram, because a lot of people mention it, talk about it, um, recommend talking about I Who Have Never Known Man by Jacqueline Hartman. This was a punch in my face. And one of the reasons why we should never judge a book by its size. It's a dystopian book, and I think it was my first one. I'm now getting into dystopian books, and I absolutely loved this one. It's one of those times where Bookster and Bookstagram 100% got it right. Like, I feel like this book should be in schools or something, or i- a lot of people should be reading this because even if the story feels like it's something it would never happen, sometimes dystopian books can feel perhaps a bit silly, like this would never happen. But the way we're living these days, we shouldn't take anything for granted. I think the author, I'm not sure, but I think probably Jacqueline thought, how would a world be if there was only women in it? And I think that would be much less violent, for instance. That's because I thought while reading this book, I kept thinking, if men were at the center of the story, how different it would be. The lack of violence in the book, for instance, how women operate, how they survive. It's just completely different. We're just so different from men in a more healthier way. I don't want to give too much away because if you've never read this, but it's basically a group of women and they're trapped in a cage, and one day they are able to finally get out, and so we follow these women through this journey. And the main character is probably one of my favorite main characters ever because she's so interesting. She's the youngest or one of the youngest. And my favorite thing about her is that because she's so young, and like older women, she doesn't recall her life being in before being trapped. And so she's a very curious child, questions her humanity often. And that was very um, funny to me, because if there was one thing about this character I wouldn't question, it would be her humanity. It makes sense due to the circumstances. How this book ends, I mean, I couldn't believe it. What I was reading, I was like, genius. This is genius and so painful for a woman to be reading this, and to for us to imagine ourselves in that situation and to go through those things, for at the end, for that to happen. I really don't want to say what happens. I don't want to give anything away, no matter how many people have read this book already. Just please don't search for it. If you've never read it, just grab it, read it. Don't Google it. Don't spoil the book for you. I didn't, and it was a great decision. The third book of this small list, it's called Margot's Got Money Troubles. And this was one of those cases where I thought, okay, I'm going to read this book, but I don't think it would be probably as great as the others or anything like it. The premise is this young girl, she gets involved with a professor, she gets pregnant, he leaves her. And so I thought, oh, I've read this story before. But after a few pages, I understood it means much more than that. It explores very important issues, such as how the system constantly fails to these girls and young women, how Margot at some point had many friends, and when she truly needed them, she found herself alone, how her mother, living in her own world, also failed her in many ways, even though she thought she was doing the best. It happens. But my favorite thing about this book is definitely Margot's relationship with her father, and how he ends up being the one who steps up, because that's the most uncommon thing of this book, sadly, but it's true. Usually we're used to absent fathers. So yeah, it's a nice book. It's a more lighter book compared to the others, but like I said, it still tackles important matters. So yeah, Margot's Got Money Troubles. And the series adapted from it just came out. I haven't watched it yet, but I've heard it's quite good, so I want to give it a try. The fourth book. Now, this has got to be my biggest surprise of all, because I genuinely thought I'm not going to enjoy this. And I'm talking about Bonjour Tristesse by Françoise Sagan. And why did I think that about this book in specific? Because two movies adapted from this book are out. One of them, that's the older version. I haven't watched any, but when the most recent version came out, I watched the trailer, and so I knew what the story was about, and I thought immediately, this is a big cringe. So I didn't watch the movie, but out of a sudden, I felt the urge to read this book, and thank God I did, because I loved it. First of all, Françoise was really young. She was like 17 or 18 when she wrote this book during the 50s, or at least it was published in the 50s. So, big thing. And in this book, we follow Cecil, also a young girl, and it totally made sense that Françoise was as young when she wrote this, because it's clear how she understands Cecil's feelings perfectly well, and how a young girl's mind works, how she feels things. When we are young, we feel things in a more intense way, and we are so impulsive, and sometimes that leads us making the worst of decisions, and that's exactly what Cecil is going to do. um Also, there's another character, and she's very important in the story. And so Cecil's dynamic and relationship with her, it was very interesting to me, and the delight to read, because they're so different. There's like the youngest thinking she knows it all, the other, well, knowing she clearly doesn't know anything. And so she tries to sort of guide her. And Cecil looks up to Anne, the older woman, but at the same time, a lot of times she doesn't want her around. It's like you're getting in the way of things for me. And it's so well written. It's a perfect summer read, at least it was for me. Though I did plan to read this on summer and I ended up reading it before, but I absolutely loved it. It was I read this in one sitting, and for someone who thought uh, who wasn't going to enjoy the book, it was amazing. Now we coming to an end. The last book of this list, It's All River by a Brazilian author called Carla Madeira. Thank God I know how to read Portuguese because there's a translation of this book, like I said, called It's All River, and I believe I suppose it's a good translation. But Portuguese is such a rich language that it's great to be able to read this in Portuguese because Carla way with words. It's perfection. There's a lot of controversy around this book, I discovered. I understand because this is one of those books that will leave us, that is going to leave us uncomfortable many times. And since I've read it, there hasn't been a day where I didn't think about what I read in here, questioning, even questioning, should I have enjoyed this book as much? Because when I say I loved this book, it's not like I wish it had a different ending. I wish a certain character had made different choices, but life doesn't happen that way. It's not all good things all the time. And so I think Carla explores that and also a darker side of human beings. And I think she did it in a great way. I think she did it wonderfully. And so I want to read more books of her. I've seen many Brazilian bookstagrammers recommend her and this book and others. And so I'm a lover of Brazilian culture, like all the way Brazilian, even though I'm not. I love Brazilian cinema, I love Brazilian music, and I was failing in terms of literature. So I studied here. Now I want to read more classics. So if you happen to be Brazilian and you have book recommendations, anything, just leave it in the comments, please. I do have my own list, but it's always nice to hear what other people have to say and to recommend. I'm not sure if I will ever read this book again. Sometimes I do revisit books, and I think it's a good exercise to do because we do change opinions, we do grow, and sometimes at first read we skip certain things, we don't notice as much because we're just like, I want to read this and then I want to go like so in the middle of it all. And then sometimes you read a second, a third time with a much more mature view of things. And I think that's one of my favorite things about reading is that precisely. Now, I'm currently reading a few more books. By the end of the year, I think I'm pretty sure I will add more books to this list. But yeah, this is it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Um, like I said, I'm still trying to figure out where I'm going to do with this YouTube channel. I think at first it will be more of if I have an idea, I will post. Um, but I would like for it to be something more structured. I'm not going to lie. So let's hear how it's going to work. No pressure. You know what to do. Subscribe, comment, share if you feel like it. I also have my other social media on the description of this video. And yeah, see you around.